Let's talk about sex, baby.
Thank you.
Specifically, let's talk about sexual boundaries. In our series on boundaries, we have to talk about this one because sex is a vulnerable act, and everyone engaged in any kind of sexual activity needs to, not just deserves to, but has a right to feel safe. And boundaries in sexual relationships are going to be the thing that provides that safety. So what are sexual boundaries? How do you know what your sexual boundaries are? And how to set them in ways that are going to be clear and respected? Because that is incredibly important, especially when it's something as vulnerable as sex. We're also going to talk about what sexual boundaries look like with other people that you have platonic relationships with, because absolutely those sexual boundaries can get crossed, not just with the act of actual sex, but with comments, with gestures, with looks. You know it. It's happened. Whether you are whatever gender, male or female, or neither, you have had it happen where someone has said something, touched you in a way, looked at you in a way that has made you feel uncomfortable. But you didn't know what to do. You didn't know what to say. So we are going to talk about that as well today. But first, if you're new here, welcome to our incredible little corner on the internet. Take a second, introduce yourself in the comment section below. If you are back again, it's always good to have you. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. The button is right down there. Join the party, join the community. Let yourself connect here and be seen here and contribute to the conversation. So good to have you. You can like the video if you get something out of it. That would be amazing. And either way, my name is Kristina, and I am a registered clinical therapist, a researcher, a coach, and a speaker, and the creator of my membership community, the Shift Society. You can get more information about the Shift Society in the description below. I help heart-centered humans break through the crap that is holding them back so that they can like themselves and their lives more every day. And sexual boundaries. What are they? What do they look like? How do we know when they're being violated? So we talked at the beginning a little bit about why sexual boundaries are important. But another big reason why they are important is because sex is supposed to be something that is pleasurable, that is enjoyable, that can be bonding, that for many is meaningful and intimacy and closeness creating. But without those boundaries, it can go from all of those things to something that is uncomfortable, that can be hurtful, that can be dangerous, that can be very vulnerable and not in a good way. Boundaries help everything within a sexual relationship feel safe and trustworthy. And that is incredibly important, especially with something as vulnerable as that. So, what do healthy sexual boundaries include? Of course, they include consent, that both parties are giving consent, not just with having sex or not having sex, but even the type of sex that you're having, the sexual activities that you're engaged in within the bedroom or wherever you're doing it, that everything around the sexual experience is given consent. So it's not to say that if someone consents that, yes, I will have sex with you, that everything goes and that means that they are giving consent to everything sexual. They're not. Anytime that there is something involved in a sexual relationship, consent needs to be given, or at the very least, boundaries need to be respected. If you're engaging in some kind of intimate act with someone and you initiate something and they don't like it, they can say, no, I don't like that. Please stop. I'm not comfortable with that. That's not my thing. Let's not go there. Then respecting that is a boundary as well. Respecting their boundary with it is incredibly important. Another boundary within sex is discussing beforehand what you like, what you don't like, what feels good, what doesn't feel good, what you're okay with, what you're not okay with. If there are certain things that you're like, really, nope, not comfortable with that, don't like being touched like that, don't like being touched there, whatever it is. If you're like, you know what, I do not like people touching my toes. That is your boundary, saying I'm very uncomfortable with that. It doesn't even have to be something overtly sexual or kinky or anything. It can just be something that you don't like. I don't like being touched there. I don't like being kissed there. I don't like having contact with those body parts. You're allowed to say that, and that needs to be respected in order for the sexual relationship to feel safe and to feel trustworthy. You can request a condom whenever you want to. Either person can say that they are either going to put on a condom because that's what they feel comfortable with, or the other person can say, I want you to wear a condom and that's what I feel comfortable with. That is a clear request, and it can even be a very clear boundary and saying, if you are not willing to do this, I am not willing to do this. I can't force you to do anything, but if you do not, then that is your choice. And then my choice is going to be to not have intercourse with you. So being able to feel safe with that, also really important. Before engaging, or maybe right before engaging in sexual activities, having a conversation around contraceptives. What are your beliefs around that? What are your preferences around that? What are your agreements on that? And being able to be on the same page with that. As we're going to talk about in just a minute, a boundary violation is lying about contraceptive use. That is a huge boundary violation, not being upfront, not being clear, not being honest. So making sure that you're having those conversations, not just assuming that you are on the same page, knowing that you are on the same page, because the consequence of not being on the same page can be a pretty big deal. And so making sure you're taking the responsibility to get clear on that, to ask about that, to have an agreement and an understanding about that. You're allowed to say no to anything that you don't like, that you're uncomfortable with, that you're not ready for at any time. You're allowed to just say, no thanks, don't want that, please stop. Even if it's something that you may have done before, but you don't want to do now, you're allowed to change your mind and say, you know what, I realize I don't want to do that. I changed my mind on that, especially when it comes to sexual things. You are allowed to change your mind. Maybe something that you thought was going to be okay turned out to not be okay with you. Maybe something was triggering some past pain or some past trauma, and the act in and of itself wasn't that big of a deal, but it triggered other things in you, and you don't want to have that experience in your sexual relationship. And so being able to just say no to whatever you want or don't want whenever you want to, and having a conversation about that. You can have an honest conversation with your partner about that, explain to them, especially if it is a closer relationship, but if it's not a closer relationship, just being able to say no, and the other person does need to respect that. And then another boundary within the sexual relationship that might not be as obvious is both parties agreeing what they are comfortable having other people know or not know about their sexual relationship. So maybe one of the people, maybe your partner, is like, you know what, I don't want you to share things about our intimate time together with your friends, with your siblings, with your workmate around the lunch table, whatever that is. I just want this to be kept between you and I. Or maybe I don't want you to share it with other people, but you can share it. I'm okay with you sharing it with like your best friend. But having that clarity as well, because some people are very private, and being able to respect those boundaries. And if you are someone who is very, very private, you are allowed to have those boundaries. So then what does it look like? Specifically, what do those sexual boundaries sound like when we are speaking them? I've given you a few examples and what we just talked about here, but here are a few more. Being able to say, would you like to have sex now? Shall we have sex now? Do you want to take this into the bedroom? Those are all forms of consent. Asking the person if that is what they want to do. Another one, being able to say, I want to take this further. Is that okay with you? Are you comfortable with that? Is that what you want as well? Getting that clarity. When you're engaged in sexual activities, being able to say, is this okay with you? Is it okay if I do this to you? Are you comfortable? Are you okay? Just just making that clear, checking in with both people, checking in with their partner throughout the experience. Just asking, what do you like? What do you not like? And getting that clarity as well. Another example is just being able to say, I don't like that. That doesn't feel very good. Can you please stop that? Can you do this instead? Making that clear. Another sexual boundary can simply be stating that you don't want to have sex at that particular time. Even if it's with your partner that you have a sexual relationship with, it doesn't mean that you always have to have sex just because the other person wants it. Now, being able to talk about and maybe even set up times that you're having sex, or set up some safe words around sex, when it's a go, when it's not a go, because it can be really hard on relationships if one person is always initiating and the other person is always turning down. That can create bitterness and resentment and hurt, because again, sex is a vulnerable act, and so is initiating sex. And if that initiation is being rejected or declined frequently, then it can feel really bad for the other person. And so being able to have a conversation around that, being able to say, usually and on these days, or after this kind of day, or when I've been going through something like this, I'm usually not in the mood, but at these times I typically am. And this is when I like to have sex, and this is when I don't like to have sex. This is when my libido is high. This is when it's really low. And just being able to have those conversations, and then also having the safety and being able to say, hey, I am not in the mood for sex tonight. I don't want to have sex, but I would love to cuddle with you. I would love to make dinner together. I would love to snuggle up and watch a movie. I would love to go do a workout together. Offering another alternative to creating some kind of connection and intimacy, because sex is an opportunity for connection and intimacy. You might not feel like doing that exact thing, but being able to honor and respect that your partner wants to connect with you, and so offering a different way to do that with them. Now let's talk about some sexual boundaries in other relationships that are not your intimate relationships. So these would be in platonic relationships with friends, coworkers, family members, other people in your life who are engaging with you in a sexual way, and it's not what you want. It's not what you're comfortable with, and it's not what you want to have continue. What do you do in situations like that? Being clear is incredibly important. And I know that often we worry about calling these things out because we're worried about making someone else feel uncomfortable. We're worried about offending someone. We're worried about hurting someone's ego. But here's the thing. When you don't say anything, when someone is engaging with you in a sexual way that is very uncomfortable for you, you are putting their desire to engage with you in this way over your need and right to feel safe, to feel comfortable. It is more important for you to feel safe and comfortable in the presence of another person than it is for them to not be offended with your boundary. It's okay if they are offended. It's okay if they don't like it. They might not even be intending to offend you or to make you uncomfortable. They might just have different ideas about what's okay and what's not okay, what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. They might not even be aware they're doing it, because so much of our culture, there just have been cultural beliefs for generations, for millennia, especially around men, that men are allowed to talk to women in these ways, that they're allowed to see women in these ways. They might not even be aware that they're doing it or see them themselves in this light, but it's ingrained in our socialization. Still in this day and age, there are still messages and innuendos and socialization that often give men, maybe even in an unconscious way, or even some women as well. I'm not trying to single anyone out here, but typically throughout history, it has been about men being able to put their sexual desires onto women openly, that women have been seen as the role that fulfill the male's sexual desire, that is their job, that is their duty, and the men have the right to that. I'm not saying that it's necessarily still that way for the majority of men in our culture, but in other cultures it is, and throughout history it has been. And so whether or not it is intentional, you are still allowed to have a boundary around it. You're still allowed to say something like, that makes me uncomfortable. Please don't make comments like that. I don't like it. Please don't say things like that to me. I don't think that's appropriate. I'm not okay with it. I don't feel comfortable when you look at me that way. When you scan me up and down, that makes me feel uncomfortable. Could you please stop doing that? Hey, I know that you are maybe trying to just be nice and welcoming, but I just don't like being touched by other people. I don't like being touched by people I don't know very well. I don't like being touched by people that I work with. I'm not comfortable being touched, period. Please don't touch me, even if it's just something subtle, like someone putting their hand on the small of your back, someone just sort of like rubbing your shoulder in an intimate way. You're not comfortable with it. If it gives you an icky, uncomfortable feeling, you're allowed to say, no, thank you. Please stop. I don't like that. You're allowed to move aside and just put up your hand and just say, even, respectfully, I'm not comfortable with that. Please don't do that. You are allowed to say, it is important that you say. You're also allowed to just make it clear if someone is advancing on you and you are not interested in having a relationship with them, you don't see them in that way, make it clear. You might hurt their feelings by saying, you know what, I think you're great. I'm not interested in you like that. I'm not offering that. I don't want that. Whatever that is, make it clear to them. It might hurt their feelings. It might hurt their ego, but it's going to clean up things up and it's going to create that very clear distinction and separation so that you don't have to continue to feel uncomfortable with this person making advances at you that you really are not interested in receiving or reciprocating. Start with those. Start with paying attention to yourself. Start with knowing yourself. What is okay with me? What is not okay with me? Learning how to trust yourself with this is incredibly important. I have a guide for you. It's called The Simple Steps to Self-Trust. Knowing where your boundaries are in any situation. Knowing how to trust what feelings are coming up for you. Knowing how to know when to say something, to speak up about something, listening to yourself is all built on learning how to trust yourself. And I have a guide for you. It's called The Simple Steps to Self-Trust. You can get that in the description below. That is going to be big because sometimes we don't even know where our boundaries are. We don't even know what to be paying attention to. We don't have a relationship with ourselves. So it's really hard to know what's okay and what's not okay until it's way too late. And by then, often the damage has been done, the harm has been done. So how do we pull it back and use boundaries as a preventative measure instead of some kind of remedial measure once the harm has already been done? That's going to come from you being able to know yourself, trust yourself, have a good relationship with yourself. And that is founded on that self-trust. So you can get the guide there. Now let's look at sexual boundary violations and specifically what they can look like. The first one, guilting, manipulating, having an angry outburst, setting a guilt trip, being passive-aggressive, giving the silent treatment when someone does not want to have sex. That is a boundary violation. Pushing someone to do something within sex that they don't want to do. Trying to coerce them, trying to force them, trying to convince them. That is a violation when they have made it clear that the answer is no. Unwanted sexual comments, especially after you have said that you are not okay with it. Like we talked about, not everyone is going to be aware, especially with the ones that are a little bit more subtle. They may not be aware that you are not okay with it. But after you have said that you don't like it, you don't want it, you're not okay with it, and they continue doing it, that is a very clear violation. As is more overt sexual acts that are inappropriate to the relationship. And when those are very clear and the person is doing them anyways, very clear violation. Another violation is, like I mentioned earlier, lying about contraceptive use. Another one is lying about your sexual health or withholding information. Even if the person doesn't ask, tell me about your sexual health. Tell me about any STIs that you may have now or may have had in the past. Even if they're not overtly asking about that, it is your responsibility to offer that information without being asked, because that is going to impact someone. Now, maybe there's a little bit of gray area around an issue you had in the past, but it is totally cleared up and is no longer transmittable or transferable. Then, okay, maybe we're going to say, maybe you don't have to share that information right off the bat, especially if it's not going to have any impact on your partner. Then perhaps you don't have to share every little detail, but you do have to. It is your responsibility to share that information with someone when it maybe might or could impact them in some way. And it is their responsibility, absolutely, to share that information with you up front before anything happens, not after. The next one is criticizing or ridiculing someone for their sexual preferences. Like we talked about, sex is a very vulnerable thing. And if someone shares with you something that they like, something that they're into, to have their partner ridicule or mock them or poke fun at them, it feels terrible. And it can be really harmful to a relationship. And vice versa. If you share something with your partner, even if they're not into it, even if they don't like it, that's okay that they don't like it, that they're not into that. They're allowed to have that boundary and say that they don't want to. But ridiculing you or making fun of you, that would feel, or maybe it has happened to you, it does feel really terrible, and it breaks that trust and that safety in the relationship. And then, of course, any unwanted looks, comments, touches, assault, rape. Obviously, very clear violations when it comes to your sexual boundaries. What did this help clear up? What did this speak to you? In what way? What connected with you? Get that simple steps to self-trust. Start working on building that clear, confident relationship with yourself so that you know beforehand what's okay with you, what's not, who you are, who you're not, what you want, what you don't. Get that in the description and let me know what connected with you. Where are you at? Anything you want to add? Would love to hear in the comments. Always good to have you here. Be good to yourself, okay? Until next time, take good